Hi, my name is Megan Sweet, and welcome to the use of storytelling to advance education reform. I'm so very happy to have you all with me today. So let's get going. Just gonna hide these controls. Okay. So during this session, what we're going to do is we're going to discuss the research behind storytelling and leadership. So in other words, why is storytelling important for us as leaders? We'll practice some storytelling exercises, discuss the implications for storytelling in school change, and learn how self-care is an important part of being an effective leader and being able to access your stories. And to support you with that, we'll do some self-care practices throughout. I'm Dr. Megan Sweet. I'm a career educator in the United States. I've been a school teacher and a school leader and a school district leader, and I've led reforms throughout the state of California. I specialize in education change management, which means that I train people how to envision and lead changes in their environments. While we're not meeting in person together, I always think it's important to start with norms, so we'll do them today as well. So really, as I'm talking today and as you're participating, I invite you to listen for understanding. So really just being curious about what I have to say, whether or not it makes sense, and trying to have an open mind if at all possible. Please always take care of yourself and titrate to your level of comfort and need. So please never participate or engage in a way that's going to be harmful for you. Because we're doing this remotely, we'll work together using this little icon here. So when you see this little stick figure that's rolling out images of light bulbs, please go ahead and know that that's a time when I'm going to invite you to do some work so that you can engage in this session as we go along. And here's your first roller person, the first icon. So let's start with the story of your name. That's a really great place to begin our storytelling journey and ways for us to learn about ourselves. Ideally, this is something that you can do with someone that you know, but because we don't have the opportunity for that here, we can go ahead and you just journal the story of your name. Often our name is something that so affects who we are and how we move through the world. We don't always think to share that part of our story with others. So please take a few moments to write a little bit about your name. And because we're remote, I'm just going to sit quietly for a few moments while you answer these prompts. Thank you. Great. So if you get the opportunity at some time in the next few weeks, or maybe even at the conference if you're there live, maybe share the story of your name with someone else and see what it feels like to share that story with others. Okay, so the way we're going to go through this experience over the next hour or so through this presentation is through using 3 lenses that I developed, which is my approach to education change management, which really centers around 3 different ways of seeing our worlds and ourselves and our education system. The first one is intellect. That's the one that's denoted by the glasses. And that has to do with our logical thinking and reasoning. It's the thing that makes us unique as humans, right? So we know how to calculate, create language, things like that. It's a lot of what we emphasize and focus on in school. The second is insight, and insight is our ability to learn about ourselves, look back at the past and learn lessons from what we've experienced. It really is the lens that shapes how we see and go about the world. And that's why those are denoted by dark glasses there, or shaded glasses. Insight has to do with things like our culture, our background, our family of origin, our norms, the messages that we've received about ourselves throughout our lives. And those become so ingrained in our sense of who we are and how we experience the world that it's kind of like wearing a pair of dark glasses. It shades and colors everything that we see. So that's insight. And the third one is intuition. And intuition really is about getting out of our head brain and getting back into our hearts and our guts, or learning to slow down and listen, and maybe access information that isn't so available with our quick thinking, intellectual brain. So learning to slow down and hear our own inner wisdom. When we put all three together, that's what I call using your three eyes. And the three eyes are just three-dimensional sight. So kind of similar to as if you're looking at a three-dimensional picture. If you've ever seen a three-dimensional picture without the 3D glasses on, the images are kind of blurry. You can get a sense of what you're looking at, but it's hard to appreciate all of what's there. It's a little bit fuzzy. But when you put on those three-dimensional glasses, suddenly that same image comes out at you, and it gives you have depth and perspective, and you can see around the image, and you get a lot better sense of what it is and what it's shaped like. And that's kind of what it's like to use the three-dimensional, the three eyes that I talk about. It's like putting on those three-dimensional glasses and looking at our education system and ourselves with that much more clarity and depth and perception. So that's how we'll be practicing today. Let's start with intuition first, because it's a good landing space or grounding space for us for the other lenses. So intuition is really about connecting that information that comes from outside of our heads, including our hearts and our guts and our higher wisdom. So it's learning how to access information that we have to slow down and be a little bit more quiet about. For me, the best way to start accessing our intuition is by practicing mindfulness and self-care. So let's learn a little bit about what those two are. This is a video that describes mindfulness, and I'm going to go ahead and play it for you now.
You may have heard this word mindfulness. It's become something of a buzz phrase of late. So I'm going to give you one simple, serviceable definition, which is this. Mindfulness is the ability to know what's happening in your head at any given moment without getting carried away by it. Imagine how useful this could be. Just as an example, driving down the road and somebody cuts you off in traffic. How do you normally react? I think most of us, we normally react by having a thought, which is, I'm pissed. And then what happens next? You immediately, habitually, reflexively inhabit that thought. You actually become pissed. There's no buffer between the stimulus and your reaction. With just a little bit of mindfulness, in that same situation, you might notice my chest is buzzing, my ears are turning red, I'm having a starburst of self-righteous thoughts, I'm getting angry. But you don't necessarily have to act on it and chase that person down the road, screaming at them with your kids in the back of the car thinking you've gone nuts. Now, you might be thinking, don't I need to get angry sometimes? Aren't I justified? I would say yes, but probably not as much as you think. The proposition here is not that you should be rendered by mindfulness into some lifeless, non-judgmental blob. The proposition is that you should learn how to respond wisely to things that happen to you, rather than just reacting blindly. And that, my friends, is a superpower. How do you get it? The way to get it is through meditation. I believe that meditation and mindfulness are the next big public health revolution. In the 1940s, if you told somebody you were going running, they would have said, who's chasing you? But then what happened next? The scientists swooped in, they showed that physical exercise is really good for you, and now all of us do it, and if we don't, we feel guilty about it. And that's where I think we're headed with mindfulness and meditation. It's going to join the pantheon of no-brainers like brushing your teeth, eating well, and taking the meds your doctor prescribes for you. Let me just close by saying, mindfulness is not going to solve all of your problems. It's not going to render your life a nonstop parade of unicorns and rainbows. Nonetheless, this is a superpower, and one that is accessible by you immediately.
I've seen this video so many times, and I just love it. So let's explore those key terms for just a moment, because I think they often get confused. So we're going to use the analogy of exercising to help us to clarify the difference between meditation and mindfulness. So just like if you're going to the gym, you're going there with a very specific intention of getting healthier. The little image there is of somebody lifting weights. But when you go to the gym, that's your intention. You're going there specifically with the intention to get stronger and more physically fit. The same thing is true of meditation. When you're sitting down to meditate, you're very intentionally doing the practice of meditation. And the practice of meditation is really just our practice of coming back into the present moment. That's all that meditation is. I think oftentimes people think of meditation as something that is mysterious, or the only way you're doing meditation right is if you have no thoughts. But that's actually not realistic for human beings, and that's not a good way to think about it. So meditation really is just practicing returning to the present moment over and over and over again. Our minds are trained and attuned to travel off and go different distances, different places. There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is when we're not in the present moment, then we tend to suffer a little bit. So when we're meditating, we're simply just practicing catching ourselves when our mind has wandered and coming back to the present moment. Catch when our mind has wandered and coming back to the present moment. That dedicated practice of being present. Mindfulness, however, is maintaining that present moment awareness while you're living your life. So trying to be present and as aware as possible while you're going about your day. Whereas in meditation, perhaps you're sitting on a cushion somewhere, or you're going somewhere very specific to meditate. With mindfulness, you're practicing that present moment awareness as you live your life, as you're going to the grocery store, as you're working, whatever it is that you're doing. So the analogy around getting physically fit would be walking. So for example, if you want to integrate a more healthy exercise routine into your life, you might go to the gym, but to integrate it as you're kind of going about your regular life, you might choose to park your car a few blocks away from the office and walk in, or take the stairs instead of the elevator. So in that way, you're integrating your physical fitness routine into your daily life. It's not necessarily something you're always going to the gym to practice. You're finding ways to practice it as you live your life. And that is the same analogy of mindfulness to meditation. Here's some research about mindfulness and educators in particular that I think is really important. First of all, there's research that says that teachers who practice mindfulness, this research report was on a specific kind of mindfulness practice called mindfulness-based stress reduction. But teachers who practice mindfulness have a reduction in burnout. Their classrooms become more organized and they have better teaching behaviors, even though that's not at all what they're intentionally practicing. It's just a benefit of practicing mindfulness. And they have increased self-compassion. So that's all pretty great for simply learning how to remain yourself in the present moment. Here's a little bit about self-care. Self-care, is the way I define it, is showing genuine care and concern for yourself. And a good way to think about it is it's treating yourself like you would a loved one. We often treat ourselves far worse than we would ever treat a child or someone we cared about, a partner or a family member or a friend. So when we start to practice self-care, we learn to put that same care that we give to others back to ourselves again. And when we practice self-care, we also practice, in my world, self-compassion, which is really showing care and concern for ourselves and being a little bit more patient with ourselves when we make mistakes or we hit a roadblock. Self-care is both emotional and physical. I think often when people think about self-care, they imagine things like getting their nails done or getting a massage or having a nice meal. And while those are all true, and those are some of the physical elements of self-care, including like exercising and eating well, self-care is also tending to our thoughts and our emotions. So it's acknowledging what we're thinking and feeling and making space for that, and ideally meeting it with compassion and care. This is one of my favorite quotes. This is from Audre Lorde, who in the United States was a civil rights activist. And she said, "Caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare." And what she meant by this is that taking care of herself and learning to make sure that her body was healthy and strong was the most important thing she could do to advance the social justice measures and issues that she was focused on. Because if she wasn't healthy and well, then she couldn't work on creating better rights and opportunities for people in the United States. So I think that's a really helpful way to think about it. If we don't take care of ourselves and make sure that we're at our best, then we can't be our best for our students, teachers, profession, family, anything that we really care about. There's some research on self-compassion that I think might be helpful for everyone. When we practice self-compassion, and again, self-compassion is acknowledging what we're feeling, being present with it, and trying to meet whatever we're experiencing with care and kindness rather than judgments. When we do that, people who have practiced self-compassion have a growth mindset, which basically means they believe that change is possible. They believe that they can improve and be different than how they are presently. They're more motivated to correct past mistakes. So when we meet our mistakes with compassion rather than judgment, we're more motivated to try again. We are more motivated to grow and learn from others. So when we practice self-compassion, which is really just dealing with ourselves, it opens us to grow and learn from others, receive other people's feedback, and it increases our effort to improve after a setback. So if we make a mistake or don't succeed in something, if we meet ourselves with compassion, we're much more likely to try harder the next time to be successful. It's all pretty great. All right, let's take our first self-care break. As I said, we're going to take these throughout. If I'm talking about self-care, I definitely need to lead you in some self-care practices. So this first one is called a 3-breath micro practice. And it's just as simple as 3 breaths that bring us back online and back into the present moment again. So I'm going to close my eyes, and you can close yours with me, or you can keep them open. But just sitting straight up, not rigid, but with your back straight. And then we're just going to breathe in. So breathing in and then breathing out. Just acknowledging the act of breathing that we can so easily forget about during our day. With the second breath, we're going to feel into our body. So as we breathe in, notice your body. If there's anywhere that's tight or tense, as you breathe out, try and soften it just a little bit. And with this third breath, we're going to remind ourselves what's most important in this moment. So breathing in, ask yourself what's most important right now, acknowledge that, and let it go with the out breath. Thank you for participating with me on that. Hopefully you feel a little bit better, like I always do when I do these 3 breaths. I like teaching this to educators because it's something that we can do throughout our day, whether we're in the classroom with students, or if we're in a meeting, or we're walking around campus, if we're at home. We all have time for 3 breaths. We can do it on the move. I often take these 3 breaths as I'm walking from one place to another one. And it's just a great way for us to, again, practice that mindfulness on the go, bringing ourselves back into the present moment. Okay, let's learn a little bit about insight. So insight, I think, is kind of a powerful combination that is born out of mindfulness and self-care that help us have self-awareness. And so when we take mindfulness and self-care and put it together, this increases our self-awareness, and self-awareness is crucial to our ability to take advantage of insight. Self-awareness supports us both for ourselves and others. So when we practice self-awareness for ourselves, we have a greater sense and support for ourselves that supports us with that self-compassion part. And when we're more aware of ourselves and what we're thinking, we actually have more happiness, clarity, and it deepens our emotional intelligence. And when we have that self-awareness, again, being more aware of our own thoughts and feelings, it actually helps us to be more regulated and grounded when we engage with other people. So our self-awareness helps us to be better with other people. And when we're self-aware and grounded in that way, it actually helps other people to become more self-aware as well. So we have mirror neurons as human beings. And so when we encounter someone who is calm and regulated and happy, we actually start to feel that way as well. So we start to mirror their emotions. The opposite is also true. If we're around somebody who is angry or dysregulated or upset, we tend to get dysregulated as well and might start feeling some feelings of anger or other kinds of stress responses. So when we feel better, others around us feel better. Super important when we're talking about being in front of kids. Okay, so here's a little bit about a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Buddhist monk and civil rights leader as well. And he says, self-understanding is crucial for understanding another person. Self-love is crucial for loving others. When you've understood your suffering, you suffer less, and you're capable of understanding another person's suffering much more easily. I can't say it any better than that. This is why that self-awareness is so important for us as we move through this work. So I mentioned this already a little bit, and this has a lot to do with those the coloring on the dark glasses in the on the insight part of the lenses here. We're wired for social connection. Our cultures and communities and families of origin influence how we see ourselves and others. We are constantly influenced by the messages we receive from society on how we see ourselves and how we see other people. We as educators greatly shape other students' self-perception. So how we think about and what we believe is true for our students starts to become their truth. So we need to be very careful about how we assess and think about our students. And really interestingly, there's a lot of research coming out that says that when our cultures and our identities are not represented in the classroom, students learn less effectively because they don't feel as safe or as welcome. So as we start to think about our culture and our social norms, it's just important to know that it influences us heavily, even though we often don't notice it or pay attention to it, but it influences our ability to learn, our ability to connect with other people, and our sense of who we are. Here's what this looks like a little bit in action, and why this self-awareness is so important for us. We as human beings process millions of bits of information every single day. We kind of, if you, on the image on the left-hand side, there's information, and literally as you're sitting here and as we're in this experience together, our brains are processing millions of pieces of information and deciding what's most important and what can be kind of cast aside. So we kind of dismiss a lot of that information. We delete it before it even comes to our awareness. So you can imagine this information coming in. We're sorting it based on our culture norms and past experiences. And really what our brain is sorting for are the things that reinforce what we believe to be true and what we know about the world. So it could be basically we're sorting for information that reinforces our beliefs and our understanding about ourselves. Again, this is how tricky this lens can be. And the only things that come to our awareness are either the things that reinforce what we already believe to be true or the things that are new or different. And often we experience those as a threat. So generally, all those millions of pieces of information that pass through, we miss all of them. Only a handful, maybe 100 or so a day, raised to our actual awareness. So, again, those either reinforce a past belief or a new or different threat. Let's imagine what this looks like a little bit and how this works. So when I was a kid, this is a very United States game. I don't know if it happens in other parts of the world. But in the summers, families go on long road trips where we get into the car and we drive somewhere. I live in California. We would usually drive to Disneyland. It takes about a day. Being in the car when you're a kid is very boring. So there's a game in the United States called Slug Bug, which means that when you see a VW Bug car, you punch the person next to you, which doesn't sound very friendly or nice. You can tap them, high five them, but basically you call out when you see a VW Bug. And the whole game is to continue to pay attention to and notice these VW bugs and to call them out as you're driving the car. What happens when you do that is all of a sudden it seems like the road is filled with VW bugs. You can suddenly see them everywhere. The reason why we can do that then is because we are intentionally choosing to filter for that information. We've told our brain we want to see VW bugs. And so all of a sudden our brain starts to let us know when we see them. When we're not playing that game, generally what happens is our brain filters that information out. It's not important. Only reason why we'd want to know about the VW bug, excuse me, need a drink of water, is if for some reason maybe it's going to crash into us or something. Otherwise, our brain probably just filters out that information and doesn't even let us know about it. But if we're playing this game, it filters it and suddenly we can see them everywhere. So that's a little bit what it's like moving from autopilot to aware. We're looking for this car, this slug bug, and the car is, you can imagine the car is driving on a path, and we can call that our neural pathway. It's there, it's already happening, and it's being filtered through our brains for our awareness. And that's how our brains hold information, is they hold them in this thing called a neural pathway. And so when we're looking for thoughts or beliefs that are being reinforced, the beliefs that are the strongest for us are kind of almost like, you can imagine, almost like paved roads. They're ones that we drive on a lot. And so our brains filter for information that's going to help us to follow that same number of associations. So if we're looking for a certain car, for example, the car is there, we're noticing it, and it's on our awareness. But we can also choose to change that. So with 3 eyes, we can notice that if, for example, we don't want to have that thought anymore, or we don't want to notice those cars anymore, we can actually start to choose to filter that information right back out again and have it be somewhere else. And basically that means creating a new neural pathway for ourselves. So we can move from this autopilot, just following the beliefs and the ideas that our brain is filtering for us, or we can create a new neural pathway and give us a new way of thinking. So for example, perhaps with my slug bug example, we didn't notice the car. We were filtering for not looking at a VW car because it didn't seem important to us. So maybe if we were to continue on that way, our brain would continue to filter out VW bugs, not important. We don't care about them, again, unless they're going to crash into us, not necessary for us to pay attention to them. But all of a sudden we decide that actually we really want to pay attention to and notice VW bugs and see them. And we can create a new pathway, or basically a new way for that information to be sorted. And now we can learn about it and see those cars. Okay, that's a lot of information. So let's take a mindfulness break real quick. These are from a TV show here in the United States called Saturday Night Live. Probably heard about it anywhere you are in the world. And this is an old clip from a bit that they used to do many, many years ago called Deep Thoughts. And this self-care break is all about taking time for reflection and a little bit of humor. So we'll just watch this deep thought. It's kind of a silly one.
And now, Deep Thoughts by Jack Handey.
Contrary to what most people say, the most dangerous animal in the world is not the lion or the tiger or even the elephant. It's a shark riding on an elephant's back, just trampling and eating everything they see.
So this is kind of a funny little clip here, but humor is a really great self-care activity to do. So laughing is great for us on a lot of different levels. So certainly encourage you to do that. But reflection is also. So we're going to take a moment and have a deep thought. This is where the little icon is showing back up again. I'm saying that we're going to do a little bit of reflection. I've created a whole deck of deep thoughts. I call them a deep thought deck. So just take a moment and look at the prompts on the card and pick one to write about for a few minutes. Great. So journaling, taking the time to journal is a really great self-care break, and one I encourage you to do daily if you can. Okay, so we're at intellect. This is where we start to get into the storytelling bit. I wanted to give you the grounding and the foundations so that we could take advantage of that as we start to talk about storytelling and intellect. So this is a little bit about intellect. Why storytelling? So we know how intellect works. It's how our logical thinking and reasoning brain works. So we're going to spend our time in intellect really getting into some of the research and background around why storytelling is so important. Here's reason number one. Schools are complex places. It's often really challenging for researchers and other people who are policymakers to really understand the complexities in schools in ways that don't start to overgeneralize or oversimplify our challenges. So while the research is fine and great and important, and influential on policies, we should also make sure that we take the time to understand the stories of the people that we're serving, and make sure that we can really be sure that whatever we're imagining that the research is telling us, that we can also get a human face to that, and understand some of the nuances that the research just isn't going to be able to help us with. So here's an example of this, one that came out during the pandemic here in the United States, which is an example, access to technology. So when we all went to shelter in place all across the world, students' ability to continue to learn in school was really influenced by their ability to access technology, both hardware like computers or phones, but also the internet, so that they could actually get on the computer and use it to be in class and to do their homework. And that was a challenge here in the United States. If for a lot of students, if their families don't make enough money, it was hard for them to have the right technology to be able to participate in school. So here's some facts related to that. Again, this is a research part. So here's a fact. A corporation here in the United States surveyed teachers, and they found that 20% of the teachers said that they had problems with technology during the shelter in place. So that's 1 in 5 teachers reported challenges with technology, including students' lack of access to the internet, computers, things like that. 78% said their districts provided students with devices, but only 45% supply their kids with the ability to access the internet. So while up to 80% of our schools gave students computers and things where they could engage in classwork, only half of them, less than half of them, gave students access to the internet, which means that kids might have had a computer, but if they can't log on to the internet, then they can't participate in school. And finally, this last one is a little bit hard to read and understand, but basically it said that our most low-income schools and communities were the most impacted by this challenge. So the teachers who worked with students who were our poorest noted that those students had the most challenges getting online and using their computers as compared to our wealthier school districts. So those are all really important facts about accessing technology during the pandemic. But here's a story, and this one was really powerful and impactful here in California. So I gave you some facts about access to computers. And then in the midst of all this, while we were noticing students not being able to access technology, this mother took a picture of her children and put it on social media. And her children, because they didn't have access to a Wi-Fi hotspot, had to sit outside of a Taco Bell and use their devices to get onto the internet and participate in class outside on the street because they didn't have access to the internet at home. That image and the story behind it was so transformative for so many people because it just put that human face, like I said, onto the situation. Before we move on and talk about the effects of both, I'd like for you just for a moment to think for yourself. Which resonated more for you? Which was more important to you or impactful for you? The facts that I shared with you or the image that I shared? And why do you think that's so? So go ahead and just take a moment to think for yourself. Were the facts more impactful to you or was the image more impactful for you? No wrong answer. Okay, so I'm going to move on. As it turned out, the image was far more impactful. So while this study came out and shared lots of important information and factual information about access to technology, this story caught on like wildfire. So here are just some newspaper headlines discussing the impact of this one image and the story behind it and what happened here in California. So there was a newspaper article showing the symbol of the digital divide. Here's another newspaper article, more than $150,000 raised for California family. So this mother, just by showing this picture, $130,000 was donated to her family so her family could do schoolwork. The school sent the family a hotspot. they actually inspired a new law here in California. So this one picture, this one instance inspired a new law to be created in California to support other students to have access to technology, all with this one image. The article with all those facts and figures did not create this kind of a buzz. It's helpful though, right? Those facts and figures are important. They help to give some information and significance behind an image like this. But the image is something that kind of caught everyone's hearts and minds in a different way. The reason why this is happening is because storytelling invites a communal approach to solving our problems. This is two different images that come from Parker Palmer's The Courage to Teach book. So facts and figures are much more like the image on the left-hand side. There's an expert who's giving information to other people. It's very hierarchical. So that kind of research study is hierarchical. There's one expert and they're giving everybody the information they need to know about technology. And that's fine. But again, it doesn't make people feel drawn in as much. It feels top down, it feels informational, and it's sometimes hard for people to see themselves in a story or in those facts they feel told to. The other way though is this communal approach. So stories help us to see ourselves in other people. So when we hear someone else's story or we learn about someone else, we not only learn about that person, but it encourages us to make a personal connection to them. So the picture of those girls sitting outside the Taco Bell drew out people's hearts and feelings and built connections that were so transformative that they were able to make profound changes because it touched on that communal approach to solving problems and building connections. So before we move on to our next reason why storytelling is important, it's another self-care break. Again, if we were in person, I would actually give these physical cards to you. It's one of my favorite activities to do. It's a little tiny business card. It just says, thanks for being an awesome. And awesome just means great. But gratitude is an excellent self-care strategy. In fact, Albert Einstein tried to say thank you 100 times a day. And why that is important is that the act of saying thank you actually helps us to connect in with other people and helps us to feel supported and a part of a community. So it ends up being a really, even though we're like saying thank you, and in some ways gratitude is doing something for someone else, we get a lot of benefits from it. While we won't take the time to do this right now, I do encourage you to thank someone that you're interacting with. If you're at the conference, maybe tell somebody who gave a presentation that you really appreciated, or perhaps it's somebody you took a class, were in a session with, they said something that you thought was really transformative. Take a minute to thank them and tell them so. It could be thanking the server at the restaurant, anything like that. If you're home, then thank somebody who you interact with all the time, but just take a moment to say thank you. Okay, here's a second reason why storytelling is important, especially in education settings. Stories help us to build connections. A lot like that image I just showed you of the Parker Palmer communal approach to problem solving. When we tell our stories, we can build connections within ourselves as also with other people. So this is a quote from Andrew Sparks, who studied why storytelling is important in the classroom. And he says, in the telling, listening, and reading of stories, the opportunity arises to share the experiences about our own lives and the lives of others. So it connects all those different parts of our thinking and reasoning that I talked about before. It connects our cognitive head part, but also helps touch our hearts, and sometimes inspires us to act. So stories catalyze us and trigger and touch all three of those senses. And so it makes us want to, it motivates us a lot more. Again, you can think about the image of the girls sitting outside the Taco Bell. That story catalyzed action in the form of donations, in the form of creating new legislation, because people could see themselves and they felt connected in a lot of different ways to what was going on. This is a beautiful quote by Valerie Kaur, who wrote See No Stranger, which is an excellent book. But one way that we can start to build those connections is to become curious about other people, and to start to wonder about other people. And I'm going to just focus in on this middle part here. But as we begin to wonder about other people, it makes us want to advocate for them more. So she says, who we wonder about determines whose stories we hear and whose joy and pain we share. Those we grieve with are ultimately those we organize and advocate for. So when we're thinking about students in school, it's really important that we understand our students' stories and what's going on for them, because that's actually going to catalyze us to act in their behalf. It's also important that we know the stories of our peers and colleagues, the people that we work with, and the communities that we serve, because that will help us to be more effective and more motivated in the work that we're doing. Okay, quick journaling exercise for you as we're starting to explore storytelling a little bit more. This one's a quick one, but without thinking too much about it, please just fill out this sentence frame. People expect me to be blank, but I'm actually blank. Just take 30 seconds, real quick. Could be anything, no wrong answers. Okay. So let's do some reflecting on that. So I asked you to do a prompt. People expect me to be one thing, but I'm actually something else. And so it's ideally we would build this connection with other people. But as we're thinking about that Valerie Kaur quote about our curiosity about other people, it'd be helpful for us to think about, how does it feel to be perceived or seen differently than we actually are? And what do we think then those expectations are based on? And do those expectations lead to positive treatment or not? Do they have negative consequences? And what do we wish people would know about us? So if we think about how we're perceived and what the pain often is very painful and difficult when people perceive us or misunderstand us, how are we doing that to other people? So when are we being judgmental of other people or making split decisions about other people? And how can we start to be more curious? Because our goal in schools and in the world really today is to build those connections. And so one of the ways we can do that is to become aware of our perceptions and how they shape us, and how people's perceptions of ourselves shape who we see ourselves to be, and then start to get curious and hopefully a little bit flexible about changing that a little bit. Great. Okay. Reason number 3, why stories are important for us in education and education reform. Stories help us to make meaning. Some researchers that looked into self-awareness found that it's really the most important tool for effective leadership. So when we develop that self-awareness that I referenced earlier, in other words, when we know our own story, it helps us to be a much more effective leader. So when we know ourselves again, then we understand, it helps us to understand someone else. When we acknowledge our mistakes with mindfulness and self-compassion, it helps us to move through our challenges with more ease. And another researcher who looked into storytelling specifically and its impact on education, she found that when educators write stories about their experiences, even if they fictionalize parts of them, they gain a much more deepened awareness about their own leadership and about the situation. So that kind of storytelling, knowing our own stories, becoming curious about our thoughts and our experiences and what happens to us, leads to these deep insights that help us to make meaning about ourselves. And the more we know ourselves, the better we can know someone else and create really effective and meaningful change. Here's a longer quote from Diane Cattell. I love her. I think she's a brilliant researcher. She also happened to be one of my professors, so I know her really well. And Dr. Cattell says, storytelling can help leaders listen and interpret their own experiences as well as the experiences of others. Stories assist a leader in making sense of their role by initiating reflection on the actions and creating an opportunity for growth. Attending to the stories of your life cannot be thought of as a passive exercise. Rather, the act of unearthing the stories of your life is absolutely essential to your leadership growth. So there's a strong correlation between us having improved self-awareness by knowing our own stories and our ability to be effective leaders. And that could be classroom leaders, so teachers in the classroom, but also school leaders, district leaders. As we develop our own self-awareness, we become better about working with and empowering others. So let's reflect on our own stories a little bit to see what that looks like and how that works in action. So I'm going to ask you to write down 2 events that you believe have contributed to your leadership development. I'll give you an example of just one so you can go along with me. I did a martial art for a long time, a martial art called Aikido. And my teacher allowed me to be the senior student at the school. And as a part of the role of being the senior student, I set all the norms for culture and interactions in the school. And he did that without giving me any guidance about what he wanted. So we didn't sit down and go over how I should do any of how I should establish those norms or cultural values in the school, nor what they should be. He just tasked me with being in charge of it. Now, write down the value that you think is reflected in that experience. So for me, my experience with that was actually at first very uncomfortable. And finally, I just kind of stepped in and did it because he didn't give me any guidance. And when I finally asked him about it, and how I wanted to know how I was doing and if he felt like I was doing things well or not, he said to me that he didn't, give me any guidance, and he didn't tell me what to do because he wanted to watch me and what I would do and learn from me. And he acknowledged that there were times that I was doing things or making choices that he wouldn't necessarily have made. But then he said that every single time I did that, it ended up giving him an opportunity to learn. And also he saw that there are multiple ways to go about the same challenge or opportunity, and that he ultimately was happy with the choices that I made. And for me, the value that is reflected there is trust. He trusted me fundamentally to be able to lead his school. And also he had to put faith in me. So those are the two values I would say were there. Nowadays, so step 3 for you is to write about how this value is visible in your leadership now. And for me, this was such a core experience that it has absolutely shaped how I am as a leader. So now when I have teams that work for me, I try and give them that same trust and that same space that my teacher gave to me. So I sit back, I give my team the information that they need, and then I sit back and I give them a lot of room to be able to figure out, make mistakes, but also try things on their own. I don't make people do things the way that I would do them if I was to do it myself. So that's deeply shaped who I am. And that's just one example of a story. So I invite you to do the same thing. Okay. Reason number 4 for why storytelling is important is that there's an opportunity here to disrupt bias. As we've been talking about, the better we know ourselves, the better we're able to relate to other people. The better we know ourselves, we're also better able to identify those places where we're being influenced by ideas or beliefs that might not be connected with our intentions or our actual goals. So for example, I'm talking about implicit bias. An implicit bias basically means that we have a judgment or an assessment of someone without and take it to be truth without actually questioning it. In the United States, we have a lot of challenges with implicit biases about people from different ethnic backgrounds. In particular, we have a lot of biases against people that are African American, people of color from different backgrounds from around the world. And that ends up influencing negatively the experience of those people as they move through their lives in the United States. They have fewer access to opportunities, those biases, which are based on no truth whatsoever. So none of those biases are based on something real. They're based on old past racism and other beliefs. But those biases then shape the way that people see students and what opportunities they think are possible for the students that they're serving. Absolutely impacts so many parts of our lives and our culture. By noticing our own stories and starting to get curious about ourselves, however, we can start to see when those biases are at play. When we start to apply that mindfulness, when we're aware of our thoughts, we can catch them. So if you remember the image I showed you of a neural pathway, which is just a long held belief or idea that makes it through that sorting system into our conscious minds, we can catch a lot of those roads are actually biases. And the more we're self-aware and aware when those biases are showing up, we can catch them and create a new neural pathway, or new road for that car to travel on that doesn't reinforce those biases. But it requires our self-awareness and our willingness to look at that. Here's some research on mitigating implicit bias, really, really important for us wherever we are in the country, in the world. Definitely a big part of what we're doing in the United States. When we work on implicit bias, we can start to recognize it. So the most important thing about implicit bias is the moment we know that an implicit bias is there, we can start to unpack it and change it the moment we're aware of it. But if we deny that we're being influenced by a bias, if we deny that we have or having a thought, then we can't change it. So we must be willing to acknowledge that we have biases and then start to work on changing them. So some ways to do that, you can take this implicit association test, which will help you to get a sense of what some of those biases are that you might have. You can just do some reflections on implicit bias. So do some journaling. There's someone really famous called Glenn Singleton here in the United States, and he talks about writing racial autobiographies, which is really just writing the story of our lives through a race lens. Try and gain some new perspectives and have empathy for people that you might not know. Practicing mindfulness, again, just that present moment awareness, and start building new associations. So when you catch a bias that's there, you can intentionally start to rewire your brain and create that new road by having counter stereotypes. So ones that are the opposite, by interacting with people that are the ones that are the source or the subject of our biases. And by creating groups of people where there's different identities being shared together. Here's a quote from a little bit from Glenn Singleton. I'm not actually going to show him today because we're just a little bit running out of time. But I really encourage you to check out Glenn Singleton's work, learn more about him and how he includes why he thinks storytelling is so important for us to unpack implicit bias. Ooh. Okay. All right. We're almost towards the end. So let's take one more self-care break. This one's really just a care for your body. So take a few moments to stretch. We've been sitting for a long time. Ask your body if it needs anything. Is it thirsty? Does it need some food? Are you ready for a nap? Another way that you can show self-care is just by doing soothing touch, which some people, it can feel a little bit weird, but it's actually really nice just to gently stroke your own body or put your hand on your cheek. Again, a gesture of love and care that we often offer to other people, we can offer to ourselves as well. So just take a few minutes for that. Okay, so when we take 3 different eyes, let's see what it looks like when we put them together. We are now going to wrap everything up. I have created not only those 3 eyes approach to education change, but I also believe I have a cycle that I think is a really important part of it. And it starts with self-work. So when we start to work on ourselves, then and develop that self-awareness and sense of self-compassion, doing that helps us to enter in and stay in difficult conversations. So it helps us to see and understand ourselves better, helps us to be better leaders. And being able to be in difficult conversations and spaces enables us to get into the schoolwork. Once we start the schoolwork, whatever it is, whether it's just doing our regular job as a teacher or a school leader, or if we're embarking on a larger change initiative, once we start doing the schoolwork, we need to establish a culture of trust and accountability. So we need to create that safety that we've started to build within ourselves across in a team or a group. So we help people feel safe to be able to show up as themselves, as well as holding people accountable when they make mistakes. Not in a punitive way, but in a way that keeps everybody safe and feels like everyone's work is valued and respected. When you have that culture of trust and accountability, then it allows teams to work in a way that's truly collaborative and that can lead to really profound and powerful transformations in whatever setting that you're in. Doing that work of teaching, leading, changing anything gives us lots of opportunities to learn more about ourselves. So it kicks us right back into the self-work cycle again, where we can start to learn about ourselves, meet whatever we learn with compassion. And again, it deepens our ability to stay in difficult conversations. The cycle goes on and on and on. Here's another way of looking at it, the same cycle, which is with a yin yang, which I think for some folks might be more helpful. You can imagine the yin side, and the yin yang is a Chinese symbol that shows the balance between male and female energies. And the yin side, the self side, tends to be attributed to female or softer energies. And really, if you think about it for this way, Yin is about deepening our relationship with ourselves so that we can transform our own lives and our own personal relationships. And when we do that self-work, we make better friends with ourselves and our personal lives become benefited. Once we do that self-work, it enables us to do the work on the world, or in other words, the schoolwork, the yang side. So it lets us deepen relationships with others so we can transform. So yin is working on ourselves, yang is working on our schools. Here's some research on why interpersonal skills and a lot of what I just shared in that cycle are so important. This is a survey that Google did about their own staff. So Google Googled themselves, so to speak, and they wanted to know what skills the strongest employees had in their organization. The most successful employees in Google, what skills did they have? And they found that the best employees, the ones that are the most successful in Google, had strong interpersonal skills. They were good communicators, they showed empathy towards others, and they were good coaches. I want to know that their interpersonal skills were more important than any technical skills they might have had. So more important than their ability to be good at information technology and working on the search engine that is Google. Being a good person and having good interpersonal skills was more important to their long-term success. Same thing for teams at Google. So the most effective teams, the ones that were able to do the most and move the farthest within the organizations, are ones where there was emotional safety within the team and where people were able to show generosity, empathy, and curiosity towards one another, or people could show up as their full selves. So this is really important stuff if we're thinking about doing this work. So in conclusion, to tell our own stories, we need to come back and first know and love ourselves and connect with and tend to our own internal truths. We need to start to discover our thoughts, desires, and feelings and come to know our own stories first. When we know our own stories, we're then able to open up and connect to and learn from other people in a way that can be deeply transformative for our education systems and for the world. I'm not actually doing giveaways today, but I will say, while we're not doing giveaways, so I'm not here in person, if you want to know more about the work that I do and some more about storytelling and this kind of self-care process, but also the self-work schoolwork cycle, about the 3 I's, and I encourage you to purchase my book. It's on Amazon and all the other places where you can access the book, and it'll give you lots of information about how to create change. And finally, if you want to learn a little bit more about me and connect with me, I invite you to go to my website, www.your3eyes.com. There you can learn about self-work and schoolwork courses that I have available, read blogs that I've written, and the work that I do to support school change. I also have a podcast called The Awakening Educator, where we talk about educational issues, and again, my book. So thank you so much for joining with me today. It's been such a pleasure. And please, hopefully we'll see you all soon. Thanks a lot.